today we are joined by Adolph Reed, author of The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives. Can you talk about what was it called? Triracial?
Oh, see.
I think there are
right.
interesting tidbits about this in the book.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this movement for economic sovereignty coming out of, certain Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear that that's a reaction to Jim Crow.
Right.
And that a move to create a separate Black economy,
right.
while short-sighted and ignorant of the fact that you couldn't sustain it without rights from the state,
right.
was still a kind of way of trying to subvert Jim Crow,
mm-hmm.
but tacitly an assumption that Jim Crow was forever, right?
No, that's right.
And same, I think, with the kind of triracial, let's be declared.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, can you talk about that community and give us a description for the audience?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, there was, as a general phenomenon or just a Halawa?
Yeah, talk about the Halawa because you focus on them in your book.
The one thing in the book that has led me to sweat being come after,
mm-hmm.
right, is that there's a woman who writes for the Washington Post who is active as a Halawa Saponi.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know anything about the Saponi back in the day, and I'm assuming that this is just an alliance that got formed to kind of to legitimize everybody's race claim, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding of the Halawa, and this was, I learned about this not long after I got to North Carolina. In the section of the state, from Warrenton, a town called Ahoskie, which was ground zero, there's what phenotypically looks like or seems to be a big mixed race population, mm-hmm. right? Big by, North Carolina standards or whatever. And the story about the Halawa is at some point in or after World War II, an element of this mixed race population decided that they weren't Black or were tired of being Black, and Lord knows anybody could be tired of that, right? And there's a Lumbee population there too. So they decided to create a Native American identity for themselves. And from what I understand from people with direct connections to it, I have a friend whose own family split over this. Her father and one or two of his brothers stopped speaking to each other. So
wow.
I know it's not an urban legend. So from what I understand, some of the early expressions of the Native American identity were, and this wouldn't be surprising either, but were naive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, in Oxford, for instance, there was a section of the town called the Stronghold after Cochise, right, from the TV show, right? So,
mm-hmm.
But the thing is that they are inauthentic only if you believe in authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and if you don't believe in authenticity, well, there's no problem, right?
Yep.
Right? I mean, you are what you say you are.
Mm-hmm.
Or as my son said, in his updating of Du Bois's thing about a Black man being someone who must ride Jim Crow in Georgia, well, that you are what the police think you are.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Oftentimes society is the judge of authenticity, not individuals. I do think there's a move to switch it where it's you decide your authenticity.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole other problem.
Nowadays, I do think there could be, depending on who you are, a critique of that community or mm-hmm. reading into it. This kind of gets to the passing chapter, you're not being your authentic identity. You must have animosity. Again, race is all about animosity.
Right.
When in fact, you point to all of these kind of quotidian examples of people wanting beignets, so
mm-hmm.
getting your grandma to go in because she could pass.
Right.
And it wasn't an assault on the Black identity or a declaration of animosity. It was a simple matter of the calculus of Jim Crow.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's and I'm trying. Yeah, I mean, it's an accommodation that people make.
Yeah.
Right. So and from that perspective, it's not that different from the Black doctor who buys a house in a neighborhood that's not necessarily a white one, but that's class insulated from working class black people. Right?
Yep.
Or from that perspective, it's not that different from having Jack and Jill to put your kids in to make sure that they have class homogeneity, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was always kind of charged, but like I said, like my first encounter with the passing phenomena was this woman who was kind of intriguingly glamorous and sort of big in her gestures and bangles and stuff, as I recall. But I was a really little kid. But like she didn't seem to think that she was hiding anything from her black friends and family. Like, and okay, granted, this is like in that Creole world where everybody's got a cousin who crosses over somewhere, right? But the disjunction between how passing gets represented in American high culture, both the angst on the one side and the ambiguity and quadruple consciousness or whatever on the other, and the reality of it in a place where it's, or in a setting where it's a comparatively common practice, it was just so striking. Like I didn't originally intend to write about that. It's after, I think it's only after Faith Child started to push me a little bit that and I wrote about the triracial isolates, and it just seemed like that's from the triracial isolates to like the immigrants who get here, don't come, Frank Wilderson notwithstanding, don't come with a sense of anti-blackness or a sense of race for that matter. Get here, you figure out you're on the margins of the political economy, and you figure out what the rules are. And the one thing you know is that, well, I may not be able to be white, but I sure got to figure out a way not to be black. Right?
Yep.
And again, that makes sense, right? But it's not, somebody you want to give the Legion of Honor medal to, right?
Sure.
Right. But it makes sense for what people do.
And there's a disingenuous kind of way of remaking that about the sentiment of those people.
Right.
But actually the sentiment wouldn't be possible if the rules of the game were different.
Right.
If the rules of the game had changed, then the sentiment would have changed too. I think your book does a really good job of making it clear how this story is being written from the contemporary perspective backwards, right? Where the contemporary perspective is being imposed on a lot of these people. And when you're saying, this is what I lived, this is what I saw, here's how ideology works, it actually makes it clear that the real engine of racism wasn't the day-to-day feelings that people had.
Right.
It was a system that required them to behave differently towards a set of second-class citizens.
Right, that's it. Yeah. And you put your finger on something else very important, which is the tendency to read the past from the standpoint of the present. Shortly after my father died, I was out in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where he lived, just getting his affairs together. And at some point, I wanted to, go see a movie or something, and I had friends there who were still very good friends. And Cold Mountain had just come out. I didn't know anything about it. I knew that it had Nicole Kidman in it, which was one reason not to see it. But anyway, so before I saw it, I read a review, or I read an essay by Manola Dargis when she was still at the LA Times. And it was really smart. It was on that and some other period films. But what really struck me about it, what most struck me about it was what was the point she made that the only people who pay attention to historical accuracy now are the prop makers and the set designers, right? So like the restoration hardware, stuff is all like 1860, but the sensibilities, the dialogue, the moral compass is like pure contemporary neoliberalism.
Yep.
Right, and to me, like that's a point where art meets fascism, and I understand that there are much more mundane dynamics driving this, right? Well, at the props of the star of the show, for instance, and that partly has to do with like international markets and whatnot, but that sensibility has also come to dominate how people who get paid, right, and sometimes handsomely, with really nice working conditions compared to how the vast majority of Americans work today, to think about and write about the past, do it too.
Yeah.
Right? So back in the days when I developed my rep as the firebrand or whatever, that's the kind of stuff that I was reacting against. That, and so, I mean, here's like I said, I didn't want to talk too much about my autobiographical stuff, but I'll say this. Like after Ronald Reagan was elected the first time, and people got to see that he wasn't another version of Nixon who talked it and did something else, that he was serious and they had like a revolutionary program. My reaction was, well, okay, I need to make common cause with liberal Democrats. So I tried to do that through most of the 80s, right? And then like the underclass stuff hit. Now, Ken Auletta had published a 5-part, I think, piece in the Atlantic, which has always been what it is, which became a book where he sort of lays out the underclass idea. But then the liberal academics pick it up, and it's pretty clear what this thing was. And then even people who understood themselves to be leftists, socialists. I mean, I can't tell you how many people got in my ass for criticizing William Julius Wilson unfairly because he said structurals, right? So by the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, like I was just so pissed off about that stuff that I would just call it out. And my defense was, when people would get my ass for calling it out, was, well, okay, but people who are pushing this line, which is really making up just so stories about what they reify from census tract level data as poor people's behavior, right? Who I get to beat up on and drag for the most vulnerable population in the society with impunity. And since those people can't get the microphone, then I figure one thing I can do is call out the game, right? But so, like, anyway, that experiment of trying to make common cause, like with liberals, it survived Sabra and Shatila just barely, just barely. It was one of those moments where I said, well, I'm sorry, but like we have problems here I got to deal with. And then later I went to the camps, actually, in the early 2000s. But, and it survived other stuff, right? But like the underclass, but what finally did it in was Clinton. And yeah, I was just thinking about this not that long ago, but within 4 or 5 months of Clinton's inauguration, I was on the phone with Paul Wellstone, who had been a friend of mine since college, and actually went to talk to him about the possibility of somebody running like a primary challenge against Clinton in '96, and that's when I got involved with the Labor Party at the same time.
To get back to the book, you end on a really positive note. I think you do have a reputation for being a firebrand, but I think people also misunderstand your work because for them, racial fiction is so taken for granted that they can't understand what your perspective is or what you're fighting for. Right. They think it's, writ large dismissive of something that they believe in. But actually what you say is, you give all of these examples of the ways that people negotiated the segregationist order of Jim Crow. And then you said for most people, it was unimaginable that in 15 years it would be gone.
Right.
So what do you take from that lesson? I think the book ends on a kind of optimistic note that we don't know the future, and it's set against this contemporary ideology that we know the future, present, and past because certain concepts are so enduring that they will shape our history forever.
Right.
So what do you think we should take from that, the lesson of Jim Crow's failure?
Well, yeah, I think there is something optimistic there, right? I mean, and even within or at the same moment that it would be tough to be, I wouldn't say pessimistic. Well, yeah, maybe I would. It would be tough to be more pessimistic about the realities of our current moment than I am.
Yep.
But both things are true at the same time. And see, so the optimism is ultimately like the open-endedness of history, right? Well, like when in 1986 World Series,
okay, when
the Mets were down to their last out in the ninth inning, and they were going to lose to, God forbid, the Red Sox, which is like, that would be like, yep, I know from Maine, they are viewed.
I'm not a Red Sox fan.
Right, I mean, differently.
But I will be attacked roundly for saying that in this video.
Yeah. But the idea of like losing, and especially in Southern Connecticut, where the sports market was at that point kind of split between Boston and New York. Mm-hmm. So the prospect of losing to the Red Sox was just horrendous, and we're all sitting there watching the game, crestfallen, and the ball and the routine ground ball goes through the legs of the Red Sox first baseman, and the Mets win. Right. Once you put the ball in play, anything can happen. Right. And there are greater and lesser probabilities, but that's not the way the probability works, right, in the world. Right. So that's the upside. But see, the thing that's frightened me for most of my adult life, right, is, and like I think this kind of sparked something in my head when I read Voltaire's Parable of the Good Brahmin and Candide when I was like a teenager. But the idea that being oblivious can be helpful just frightens the hell out of me, because that just feels to me like concession to like the ultimate despair, right? So politically, I think I've got something a little more like a counterpuncher's but a reflex, right? That when you get hit, then the thing to do is to look around for a space that you can hit back at, or try to find a crevice like in the order that you can crawl into and start trying to pry it open. And to me, that's what the optimism is, because like I often, but I can't say have because I don't do it anymore, said to students who would want to, get into this kind of politics, I said, well, look, like it's not like NGO work, right? You got to think about it like a Major League Baseball player, that if you're successful 3 times out of 10, you go to the Hall of Fame, right? Because when you're trying to fight capitalism, you're going to lose a hell of a lot more than you're going to win. And
yeah.
So.
And I think if you said, to a group of people, a group of liberals who are very invested in the idea that there's a kind of enduring racism, if you said there's an enduring racism that's been in America since its conception and potentially in the world, they'd be like, yes, absolutely. But if you said the civil rights movement abjectly failed and every black radical and ally of the cause also failed, nothing has changed, they would be like, how can you say that?
Right.
And it's funny because you get a lot of hate, but you're saying, look at our victories. Look at them starkly. Look at them realistically. Look at the real political systems we are within. Look at the way we've changed them. I mean, what you've traced is the path of your life as it was affected by Black people gaining full citizenship in the country, however imperfect it is expressed.
Right.
And I think that, that feat shouldn't be underestimated.
No, I agree. I mean, and it's kind of a weird, almost like a schismogenesis, right? In the sense that there are 2 contradictory seeming balls you need to hold in the air, or one needs to hold in the air at the same time. That's one of them for sure, right? I mean, and but I think I mentioned this in the book too. Like when I'm out someplace now and see an interracial group of people out, just doing something, right in a bowling league or having lunch at TGI Fridays or whatever. That I recall that this is something that could not have happened as late as 1960. And there are sequelae, right, that follow from having that kind of interaction. You work in the same office together. And that doesn't mean that that it's Brotherhood Week or that you're standing on the hill teaching everybody to sing in perfect harmony together, right? But there's something there that can enable concerted behavior, right? That the whole point of Jim Crow was to preempt. And I'll tell you, like I don't say this in the book, but when we started working in South Carolina in this ballot project in 2006, we spent a lot of time working at flea markets, which are like poor people's shopping centers, malls basically. And it was striking that how many current and former interracial unions, down through the working class, right, from stable working class down to the bottom, basically, we encountered, and like what with the white grandmother who looks like she just stepped out of the uprising of '34, with her little black grandbaby, and the daughter's got some other dude that she's with, and yeah, I had a student at Penn in 2016, semester of the election, who we were talking one day, and she's from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I just assumed she was like a middle class or the child of middle class black professionals, right? And down there, it turns out she's what is nowadays called a biracial. And she was raised by her white mother's family. Father wasn't much in the picture. What with the mother's family is at the busted end of the working class. And she said that while they were driving her crazy around the Trump stuff, because they all loved Trump, and what I guess, for the sake of keeping myself out of trouble now, I should call the N-word, peppered people's discourse. At the same time in her life, she had never felt anything except loved and protected and cherished by this family of hers. So as you know, this shit's complicated, right? So why don't people want to accept the complicatedness of it? I think liberals don't, by and large, because they're invested deeply in seeing themselves as morally superior to their friends, neighbors, family members, co-workers, right? Because when you get down to it, upper status liberals are the people who, apart from the really, really rich, live the most segregated class skewed lives in this country, right? Their schools, their workplaces, right, their neighborhoods. So for them, it's almost like there's almost like a psychological need for the West Wing crowd to have Archie Bunker out there, to project all of their own or the emotional expressions of their own material practices onto him, right? So that's one reason. For the POCs, the complicatedness is unacceptable because what has become, over the last half century, right, understood as black politics, or for that matter, Hispanic or Latino politics or Asian American politics, is very much a class politics. And a class politics that's crafted within the framework of ethnic pluralism, right, like in the US.
And a natural, authentic constituency that is pre-existing and not constructed.
Exactly, right. I mean, that's exactly right.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.